Hello and welcome. My name is Mary David Pasch, and I'm a Principal Product Manager on the Copilot engineering team. Today, I'm going to walk through how Copilot for Microsoft 365 works. We'll start by taking a quick look at the overall Copilot architecture and seeing how Copilot protects your data. Then we'll dive into the Copilot orchestration flow and what core components make up Copilot. And with this knowledge, you'll understand how Copilot works and best practices for how you can get the most out of using Copilot. So let's start with a topic that's top of mind for most people. How does Copilot protect your data? Copilot for Microsoft 365 brings immense value, unlocking productivity for users and organizations. But the architecture itself is fundamentally pretty simple. It's an orchestrator and a large language model built on top of the existing Microsoft 365 solution. And all of this takes place within the compliance boundary. This means that Copilot can combine the power of cutting-edge large language models with your specific content in Microsoft Graph, your documents, emails, calendars, chats, and other business data, delivering accurate, relevant, and contextual responses. You can even connect this to public web data to help your responses stay up to date. You can use Copilot for Microsoft 365 in the apps you already use every day. So you can be more creative in Word, analytical in Excel, expressive in PowerPoint, and productive and collaborative in Teams. And most importantly, Copilot for Microsoft 365 is built on Microsoft's comprehensive approach to security, compliance, privacy, and responsible AI. Because Microsoft adheres to industry-leading privacy and security commitments, so does Copilot for Microsoft 365. The investments you've already made in securing your data in Microsoft 365 accrue directly to Copilot. Our commitments to data privacy, security, and compliance to Microsoft 365 also apply to how Copilot processes data. For example, logical isolation of customer content within each tenant with AAD authorization and role-based access control. Microsoft also uses physical security, screening, and a multi-layered encryption strategy to protect customer content. And Microsoft 365 encrypts customer content at rest and in transit. In addition to what we already promised with Microsoft 365, we also have principles for how we build AI. AI development is guided by our AI ethical framework. When we walk through the overall flow, I'll show you how we've built these principles directly into Copilot orchestration. And in particular, there are 3 key points I want you to remember. First, your data is your data to own and control. Secondly, Microsoft doesn't use your data to train the large language models. And third, your data is protected by the most comprehensive enterprise compliance and security controls. This last point is probably one of the most critical, how Copilot protects your data. Let's start with a quick look at where data is stored. In general, the storage location for tenant data for Microsoft 365 services is determined by 2 factors: the sign-up location provided for the tenant and the available geographies for the specific service. For example, say you're a customer with a sign-up location in Japan who subscribes to Exchange Online, Microsoft Teams, and Microsoft Forms. Exchange and Teams are both available globally, and Microsoft has data centers in Japan, so the data from those services will be provisioned into the Japanese geo by default. Forms, however, has not been deployed in the Japanese geo, so the data from that service is stored in the Americas region. Data residency is a type of commitment we make on top of those defaults, and it applies specifically to the location of the data at rest. Microsoft 365 customer data at rest can include things like files uploaded to a SharePoint or OneDrive tenant, Exchange Online mailbox content like your emails, or Microsoft Teams chat messages. On the other hand, examples of data in transit include mail messages that are in the process of being delivered, or conversations taking place in an online meeting. It's important to note here that data residency does not apply to data in transit. But for both data at rest and data in transit, Microsoft protects your data with one or more form of encryption. And again, we want to just emphasize that you control your data. In line with our privacy principles, Microsoft commits to not use customer data to train the large language model and other foundational models. Now that we've seen how Copilot protects your data, let's dive into the Copilot orchestration flow. Copilot can surface in many apps, but I'll show you a quick demo using it as a standalone app, and then we'll see what's happening under the hood. So let's say I'm working on a project to open a new store. Using Copilot, I can ask it to summarize what's in my inbox. It'll search across my emails to find the most relevant information. Here I'll see some of the highlights, and I'll note that there's an action item for me specifically about the Phoenix store opening. I can actually ask additional questions about that particular store opening, and Copilot will search across all the information that I have access to surface the relevant bits of information. I can also expand the references here to see where Copilot generated that response from. So what's happening under the hood? When you ask a question to Copilot, the first step is that we send that natural language prompt you type into Copilot to our orchestration engine. And that's what powers all of our Copilot experiences. Before we send your prompt to the Microsoft 365 large language model, we do a step called pre-processing, where we ground your prompt in your context and data from the Microsoft Graph. Simply put, Microsoft Graph is your data, your emails, conversations, documents, who you're working with, and other important business data. The orchestration engine determines what information the large language model is going to need to generate a good response to your prompt. And then it gets that information from the Microsoft Graph. So in my case, I asked a question about what was in my email, and so it will go and search my emails. I always want to reiterate at this point, because we're built on the Microsoft Graph, Copilot only has access to the data that you as a user have access to. We ensure that the existing security trimming, access controls, information protection, and policies are applied throughout this retrieval and orchestration. Once the Copilot orchestrator determines that it has enough Microsoft Graph information to answer your question, it'll append that information to your original prompt and send that to the large language model. I'll give a little more details in a second about how we modify that prompt to make sure you get a good response. But it's worth noting here that this is one of the places where we ensure responsible AI, because one of the things that we do is we give instructions to the LLM on how it should respond. The large language model generates a response, but before it sends it back, it does a step called post-processing. In post-processing, it does additional grounding, like validating the responses and adding citations. This is also the step where it will translate the response into a set of commands, and we'll give a little bit more on that later. And this is another place where we've layered in responsible AI. We have checks in the post-processing layer to ensure harmful content isn't generated. Throughout this orchestration flow, we make sure that we're meeting enterprise commitments and promises of responsible AI and Microsoft 365 security, compliance, and privacy. Now, in the final steps here, Copilot sends a response to the user, and as you'll see, that response can even send commands back to the apps. Copilot iteratively processes and orchestrates these sophisticated surfaces, and that's how it produces a result that feels like magic. This is a look at that overall flow that we saw, and I want to reiterate that this is entirely within the Microsoft 365 service boundary, using the Microsoft 365 private instances of large language models. The real power of Copilot orchestration is that it does more than just augment prompts with data. We'll see in a bit how orchestration can actually be changed into commanding of apps. And you can extend what Copilot can do with plugins and with graph connectors. It's also worth noting here that while everything I showed happens within the Microsoft 365 compliance boundary, that admins can optionally turn on plugins and access to public web data. This will actually go outside of the Microsoft 365 compliance boundary. And again, admins have control over whether or not to turn this on. This is a look at the overall flow, but let me dive into a couple core components that make up this flow. The technique that I showed you relies heavily on retrieval-augmented generation. Retrieval-augmented generation, or RAG, is how Copilot can respond to prompts and to answer your questions based on your data, even though we don't train the large language model on your data. When you ask a question, the Copilot orchestrator retrieves the right content from Graph in real time, and then it appends the relevant content to a unified prompt to give the large language model enough info to generate a response. This modified prompt includes several pieces to make it work properly. The first bit is that it includes your user prompt or question. Second, it will include the grounding data that's retrieved from Graph. Then it appends that relevant Microsoft Graph grounding data to the prompt that's sent to the LLM. But there are two other pieces that are really important that also get appended. Because the LLM is stateless and doesn't learn from your data, we send the chat history to provide context so that the Copilot can remember what you just said. This is how you can experience a conversational experience with Copilot. And the final piece is the most important for consistent and responsible responses. The default prompt gives Copilot responsible rules for interaction for things like where to search in the Microsoft Graph, the style and tone, so acting professionally, how it should answer questions, and how to cite sources. And perhaps most importantly, rules for ensuring it acts responsibly and doesn't create harmful content. The user prompt, the grounding data that comes from Graph, the chat history, and the system prompt all get added to one large prompt, which is what we actually send to the large language model to give it enough information to answer your question. Because prompt sizes are limited and can't reason over all of your tenant data in a single prompt, it's critical that Copilot finds the right information to respond to your user prompt. And that's where Microsoft Graph comes in. Microsoft Graph provides a unified programmability model to access your data and intelligence in Microsoft 365. And really simply put, Microsoft Graph is your data, your emails, files, and other business content. One of the ways that Copilot can access that data in Microsoft Graph is via Microsoft Search, which allows you to do things already like search for an email in Outlook or find a file in SharePoint or OneDrive. We're innovating and delivering better insights and relevance in Microsoft Search with capabilities like Semantic Fabric, which provides a vector-based index and semantic understanding over your data. And all of those investments in search relevance accrue directly to Copilot. But that's not the only way that Copilot benefits from using Graph. Because Copilot is built on Microsoft Graph, Copilot inherits the security controls you already have in place. It doesn't change the access users have to content. You can still control what users have access to in Copilot with our existing Microsoft Search and Microsoft 365 access controls and policies. In addition to access controls, you can also extend the grounding data Copilot has access to, and more on that in a bit. And Copilot can do even more than just give chat responses. When you're in a particular app like Word or PowerPoint or Outlook, the orchestration engine is capable of being more sophisticated to execute commands and help you get things done. Let's see what that looks like in PowerPoint. I can actually paste in a link to a specific file that I have, and it will create an entire PowerPoint deck from that file. It'll draft a presentation, including the outline, and it even includes things like speaker notes. And in not too long, a whole presentation full of content is generated from the document that I pasted in, and there are even designs by designer. I can keep iterating using natural language to do things like inserting a slide that I want to have. And Copilot will actually generate that based on my prompt. Or I can even reformat the content I already have. This is an example flow in PowerPoint, but you'll see when Copilot surfaces in different apps, Copilot is optimized to work in the context of that app to help you get tasks done. There are two primary ways for you to customize what Copilot can do. The first way is with plugins, and the second is Microsoft Graph connectors. Plugins are API definitions designed to add additional skills to the Copilot orchestration engine. You can do things with plugins like adding additional grounding data, but you can also allow plugins to take actions in your app. Microsoft Graph connectors, on the other hand, are an existing mechanism for how you can bring your data into the Microsoft Graph, allowing your users to use it as a data source when they ask questions in Copilot. So that's a look at how Copilot orchestration works and how you can extend it. Now that you know how it works, how can you get the most out of Copilot? There are many ways that Copilot can make you productive. Things like catch up. So in Teams, you can ask questions like, what questions were asked in the meeting, or catch me up on the latest action items. You can also create content, like in Outlook, where you can write an email, or what I showed you in PowerPoint, where you can actually create an entire deck. You can ask questions using the full knowledge of your tenant to answer questions, or you can ask Copilot to do specific tasks, like adding an image to your PowerPoint. When you ask these questions to Copilot, an important piece of this is that you tell Copilot what you need. There's a session later in this Tech Accelerator that goes into detail about best practices for prompting that's really helpful. But at a very high level, it's important that you always describe your goal. The more details you can provide about what you're looking for and the data you're looking for, Things like keywords, date range, people, and other filters will help Copilot understand what you want and help Copilot find the right content to produce a response. It's also important to be specific, not only about the type of content that you want to look up, but what you're trying to do with that content. Are you writing a blog post or just a bulleted list? Is this a formal or informal response? Who are you sending this content to? The more specific you get, the better the responses from Copilot. And the final piece that I always encourage people to do is to review and revise what you actually prompt with Copilot. Make sure that you're checking the results to see that they're correct, and you can always refine your prompts as you go. The more you refine, the more you give Copilot more context in terms of what you're looking for. And don't worry, you'll get better at crafting prompts as you practice. Just keep iterating and keep revising. In fact, we've developed Copilot Lab, which gives you a whole set of prompts that you can try. I really encourage everyone to try Copilot Lab because it gives a great foundation in terms of the capabilities in Copilot when it surfaces in different apps or if you're using it as a standalone app. So that's how Microsoft 365 Copilot works. Copilot makes you incredibly productive, but on a fundamental level, the architecture is pretty simple. And most importantly, it's built on top of what you've already invested in for Microsoft 365. That means that Microsoft protects your data and you are still in control of that data. And all of this takes place within the Microsoft 365 compliance boundary. To learn more about Copilot for Microsoft 365, check out the other Tech Accelerator sessions. Thanks for watching.